There it goes. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're here for a breakout session on protecting environmental data. This is something that happens occasionally when government websites are taken down or there's some threat to data. It was particularly acute after the new administration was announced because they were explicit in a set of databases that they were taking down that are very important for scientific research and other purposes. And the panel today consists of people who are expertise and involved in different phases of the process of preserving data, what the data are used for, how they were generated by the federal government, how academics and other groups went about saving the data, so we're going to organize the discussion today around the themes of how data are used, what are they there for, what then is done to preserve it and redistribute it, and then finally, what are the grand challenges going forward? What did we learn from this round of difficult data preservation about how we can prepare for the future? We have a great panel. Let me just go this way in the order to introduce everyone. Francesca Dominici is the Clarence James Gamble Professor of Biostatistics in the School of Public Health here at Harvard. And she's the faculty director of the Harvard Data Science Initiative, which coordinates efforts in data sciences across the university. So not just Faculty of Arts and Sciences or just School of Public Health, but every school is involved in this activity. And she leads the Dominici lab, which is focused on environmental health and very heavy data operation. Melissa Finucane is the Vice President of Science and Innovation at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and before joining the Union of Concerned Scientists, she was at the Rand Institute. She's a social and behavioral scientist. So you've got a statistician, a social scientist, and then Brian Hathaway is a lawyer, so it's like one of each. He's the Director of Environment and Climate Justice at the Lawyers for Good Government. Before then, he had been the Director for Environmental Justice in the White House in the Biden administration, and various other positions before that. But he brings a wealth of expertise both about the inside the government generation process, but also how lawyers use these data and how they're thought about in a legal way. Ana Martinez is a PhD student at the Bren School at University of California, Santa Barbara. Previously, she was a fellow at the Salata Institute, where she worked, among other things, on data preservation. So she really knows the practical difficulties of what's involved in saving data. And finally, Hannah Perls is the senior staff attorney at the Harvard Energy and Environmental Law Program and a lecturer at Harvard Law School. Thank you all for doing this, and I think we have an order in which I'd like to go, which is to start with the lawyers. And that is, Hannah, I'm just going to run this as a conversation. Hannah, why preserve data? Who uses data, and how is it used, and how is it helpful in thinking through dealing with social problems?
I appreciate the very simple question. So our program at EELP, which is a think tank inside Harvard Law School, we think a lot about regulatory design and regulatory durability. So once you finalize a reg, how do you make sure it's actually effective and it will pass muster in the courts if it's challenged? And so if I can offer sort of a four-part framework for how we think about where data needs to be integrated into this process, if the thing you want at the end is an effective regulatory program that delivers concrete public health and environmental benefits, right? You want it to actually do something. So I think those four pieces are problem identification, regulatory design, enforcement, and iteration. And I'll really quickly just run through what I mean by that. So problem identification, it's not just, well, we see a pipe and there's stuff coming out of it and it's going into a stream. That's sort of an obvious cause and effect scenario. But when you think about a problem like climate change, what we're seeing is more extreme weather events, more extreme heat events, but the cause is this invisible gas that's produced by millions of sources all over the world and has really complex interactions in the atmosphere. So obviously data is essential to documenting that cause and effect scenario. For regulatory design, Then we're thinking about what data do we have that shows how effective technical mitigation might be, or how severe are the health impacts? How strictly do we need to set this standard so that we're actually protecting people consistent with what the law demands? And I will say many of our federal environmental laws in the United States require agencies to consider the best available science. It's a term of art that you'll see in a lot of these statutes. The third thing, enforcement, or you might think about implementation. Again, how do we know that these things are actually being implemented? How do we know facilities are compliant? Are we measuring in the right place to figure out if that compliance is actually happening? And then the last one is iteration. So a lot of our federal laws actually have this iterative process baked in where we recognize we had the science we had back then, but we should double check that that's still the science we have now. And so when we think about, for example, setting certain air pollution standards every 5 years, EPA is to go in and check and say, do we know new things? Do we still think these standards are being protective? So again, if you don't have data at any one of those stages, you're not going to have an effective regulatory program, and you're not going to be able to protect public health, which I think we'll get into what's happening now, but that's a really effective way to dismantle regulation, is by destroying the data. And I think that's what we're seeing now.
Thank you. Ryan, let's get a little closer to the data. You see it on both sides, or have seen it on both sides, both on the administration end, creating information, distributing information, and also on the user end, how do you deploy it? Tell us a little bit more about the administration end first, and then maybe about the legal end second.
Yeah. So I'll say the administration side, I always like to say this statement for folks about data in the federal government. Like, if you describe your program of work or the area that you are trying to regulate, and you go and ask a random person on the street to describe what they think the state of the federal data is going to be, they will likely describe a very aspirational scenario 10 years in the future of what you should be striving for. It is often, it takes a lot of work to dress up and to normalize the data sets that cover the entire country. It is massive. When we put together CJUST at the White House as a way to try to give financial decision makers a way to not trigger many of the Supreme Court lawsuits, one that Harvard was unfortunately also a part of, that basically said we can't make decisions with money using demographic information, even when the science says that should be the way we make those decisions, right? Even when we know the likelihood of being next to a polluter is 5 times higher if you live in a low income or a minority neighborhood than it is anywhere else in the US. Even when we have that data, we couldn't use it. So we had to come up with what is the way that we make data equitable and actually representative of the human conditions that are being experienced. Because I think the really important thing from a policy making and a legislative perspective, and I should say I'm not actually a lawyer, I just supervise them. I'm only a wildlife biologist, but I have taken the LSAT a lot, just for fun.
Wildlife biologist sounds eminently appropriate for a supervising lawyer.
Yeah. I've both wrestled politicians and black bears out of their dens. So, you know, but I'll say the human element is really important, and there are things in these big data sets that we still don't know, right? Like, if you look at air quality data and where we have air quality monitors, 58% of the counties in the US roughly don't have air quality monitors, and 90% of those are rural, low income, and minority and tribal counties. Right, so it is very clear that it is a lot easier for us to get health and air quality and environmental data in Beverly Hills than it will be in East Oakland. And the hard thing is we need to figure out, as policymakers and as people leading this, where are the actual harms happening, and what do we have to do to make sure that people who don't want to care about microclimatological inversions and other things have the ability to go outside and breathe clean air, and their kids can drink water from the tap without worrying of irreversible damage later in their life. And so I think the administrative effort is to get all of the smart people in a room and get them to agree on what you can do with what you have now and what you need to do in the future to get better information.
Excellent. And then on the L4G GG
Yeah.
side, like what are you guys doing?
So Lawyers for Good Government, we are right now trying to be the field hospital on the front line with community organizations. And knowing that we might not have every specialist and everything, but that we really want to help use this preserved data to help places that are looking to invest in clean energy, invest in renewable energy, invest in communities and local driven solutions, figure out where those solutions are needed most, because the bank of the federal government is no longer funding this work right now. And the financial dollars, the dollars that are out there, there's a lot fewer of them to go to this work. So really prioritizing the areas that need this more than anyone else is really important. And so that means figuring out how to use this data in a decision-making standpoint. Basically take it and activize it so that you can get out and get money to go to the communities that need it the most.
Thank you. Now we're going to get really nitty-gritty. Anna, you did a heroic task. No other way to say it. Thank you so much. The data that you rescued in the months following the election has already been downloaded like 1 million times. It's an astonishing accomplishment. It's more downloads than just about anything else in the Harvard data repository. So tell us what you did.
Yeah, I mean, getting started, Hannah was integral to that process. She had already done work work tracking regulatory rollbacks and attacks on science under the first Trump administration in her role at EELP. That experience and the insight that she was able to lend us really was integral to getting our team mobilized and beginning this project. By the time that the election results rolled in after November 5th, our team was already strategizing how we were going to go about tackling this project. You know, we had to think about how we were going to prioritize which data sets to go after in the first place, and also where we were going to be hosting all of this information to make sure that it could remain publicly accessible. And so through initial conversations with our team and also by talking to some other folks doing similar work, we decided on a couple of key decisions. The first of those was to focus primarily on data sets that were either legally or environmentally oriented, and that was just based on the particular makeup of our team. It made the most sense based on all of our expertise. And the second decision was to go forth with using Dataverse as the place where we would deposit all of this information. And again, that was with the idea of public access in mind. And then the final decision was really to kind of orient our team around January 20th as a sort of deadline for when we would stop and reassess. And so what that meant for our team is really that from mid-November to mid-January, we were focused pretty much solely on data scraping. And that was a little bit of an atypical approach. We decided to put all documentation to the side and leave it for after January 20th, protocols, procedures, writing up a code book. We left all of that for after January 20th because we wanted to maximize the amount of time before a change in administration to scrape as much information as possible. And I think that ended up being an incredibly advantageous approach for us. Again, although atypical, it also allowed, just speaking of challenges, it allowed my colleague Dylan Carlson Servant Leon and I, who also helped with, yes, the scraping. Neither one of us came into this project with a data science background, and so that was certainly a hurdle and just speaking for myself, a steep learning curve, especially the first month of this project. And so having it, sounds like not a lot of time, but having an extra hour at the end of the day to focus on troubleshooting and fixing bugs rather than updating a code book or writing up procedures was really helpful in the process.
That's great. And there, you mentioned some other groups. Who were some of those other groups and what were they doing?
Yeah, we had the privilege of coordinating with incredible groups, also doing similar work. probably one of our coolest experiences, or in my opinion, was getting to work with PEDP, the partners, Public Environmental Data Partners, thank you. And that was a really cool experience. They've been doing incredible work to stand up some of the interactive mapping tools that have come down since January, and all of the data that we have been saving has been raw data. And so to see this visual aspect be attached to the data that we were saving, and see that increase in, of course, right, data comprehension and data accessibility was really cool experience for us. And I think the public agrees. To date, we have held the repository. It's the Harvard Environment and Law Data Repository. Again, you can access that on Dataverse, but we have 28 data sets up and over 3 million file downloads so far.
Francesca, your lab was also involved in a very different part of this world, and different sets of data and so forth, and facing your own set of challenges in doing that. What did your lab do, and what do you see as the scope for need going forward in that space?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it's interesting because Hannah, when she identified the 4 steps of the regulatory design, I wrote it down, thank you. So when she talks about problem identification, regulatory framework, enforcing, and iteration, and so in the context of the regulatory framework, all of my work, all my lab, we have been working for now years, and it's a lot of people. And what we do, we leverage all of the government databases, a lot of the work that Ryan does. And what we do is we provide the best science available to government and policy to review and potentially implement more stringent national ambient air quality standard for pollution. And so proudly, my lab was instrumental in when the ambient level of fine particulate matter were passed and made more stringent. And how we did that was exactly to that regulatory framework, but we were focusing on taking all of the data from the EPA, NOAA, and all of the healthcare system, all of the government were like over, I don't know, databases from 50 government agency, linking and analyzing it, supplementing, and do the best science. And so you can see that my entire research and the entire impact, and something I'm really proud in having huge impact in public policy and public health, was because we were always targeted about providing the best available evidence to change and pass more stringent regulatory standard. And so if you attack the foundation and the access to data, then immediately you cannot have the access to science. And so similarly, very, very briefly, I was around and still doing the work during the first Trump administration, and was very interesting because at that time, basically what happened is people at the Environmental Protection Agency started to tell us that all of the government databases regarding air pollution were going to come down. And they, actually, the EPA employee provided copy of the data, and they created, I remember at that time, we were communicating with alternative emails because they were the only one they were able to tell us that was coming. And so now, when this is happening again, of course, there were 2 things, actually many things that changed, I think. First of all, people knew that this was going to happen again. Although I think we underestimated how extensive it was going to happen. Second of all, I think that thanks to COVID, I would like to say that there was already created an environment among fantastic students and data scientists and this organization like Hannah is representing. They were already, during the COVID, there was already this movement of, I would say, crowdsourcing, where people all around the country, they had some skills, wanted to basically volunteer to solve a problem. And so this time they were prepared to start doing the data scraping. So my lab was part, and especially one person, Jonathan Gilmore, who was instrumental, and he worked very, very closely. He was part of the Public Environmental Data Partners, and pretty much coordinated together, I'm sure, with Anna and thousands of data scientists. And this was really amazing, like, you know, it was all grassroots. And basically they were, they did like data scraping session and basically volunteering to download as much as data as possible. It's hard because this government database is not something that you can download everything with a click. You literally have to go click by click by click by click. So I think the good news is we have, I think there's been really an organization among a lot of really wonderful people coordinated. So the public environmental data partners, I think Hannah underestimated because they actually had now 360 federal data sets and 67 are in progress. They are actually being really well coordinated. They're all in Harvard Dataverse and the work continues. Now, when you say moving forward, well, moving forward in addition of this effort, I think the other thing that is concerning is that unfortunately the administration is not now only stopping the access to the data, but is actually, that's more dangerous and more compromising in terms of science, is that they're stopping recording. So then if they're stop shutting down air pollution monitoring network, they're actually recording the measurements. Then it's not only rescuing data, but just having huge data gap. So I think to summarize, I think the effort is there, is coordinated in a certain way. I think they volunteered and they unified the effort. It's actually beautiful to see, but we are facing increasing challenges because if the government agency not only stop having access to the data, but stop recording the information, then moving forward, that's going to be extremely damaging because then it will be huge data gaps.
Melissa, in your space, you come at this from a different perspective now at the union, and how can we do this better? What can we as a community do to improve what we're doing and preparing for future problems or work our way through the current situation?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here on this panel. I firstly just wanted to acknowledge the hard work of so many people, also in previous administrations, but meeting this challenge and really dedicating themselves to preserve something that, as the other speakers have laid out, is essential to the functioning of a healthy democracy. We need to know where the problems are. We need to know where the disparities are. We need to be able to measure the effectiveness, the cost effectiveness of different interventions. And all of that has to be informed by an empirical database. It's not simple, as they described, to download data, let alone then be able to analyze it. And I think one of the biggest challenges, the word I'm going to use is leadership from the top on down, because we have to have a systematic, documented approach that involves an integration of multiple different perspectives about what's important. Which data to preserve will come with a lot of value judgments. Which tools are most important for helping real-world decision makers access and use data in their real-world decision processes with their limited budgets and their time constraints, et cetera. To me, I'm a social and cognitive psychologist by training, so what I hear when we're talking about data preservation is, of course, the actual technical or technological challenges and opportunities, but mostly the social component that's required for the collaboration to make this happen. But I also look a little broader or step back a little bit and think about the social political context that we're in. The Wayback Machine wasn't established because of Trump. It was established when the internet was first established, to recognizing that digital information that's used to make policy needs to be preserved so that we can go back and look at how was that decision made or why was that decision made, and do it better in the future. A lot of different uses for that. But we obviously are spurred into faster, broader, better action when there's an imminent threat. But we are not going to replace the federal government. We don't have those resources, but we are going to face repeated attacks on science and the scientific infrastructure. The way mostly my research has been on climate recovery planning, as disaster recovery planning in the context of extreme climate events. So I think about what we're experiencing now as a disaster of multiple proportions and multiple disasters happening, overlapping and compounding each other. It's not just deletion of data sets. We're seeing, deletion of scientists, the removal of scientists. We're seeing reduced funding for scientific enterprises, both in the research and in the academic community, but at federal agencies. We're seeing scientific advisory committees being eliminated or just not being convened or losing their funding. There's a long litany of things that you could identify when you look at the whole picture, that science infrastructure is under attack, and it is going to take generations to recover from this. And so when I'm talking about leadership, I think one of the most important things is actually to train our young upcoming generations of scientists to be science advocates, so that they understand that when you're in a very friendly environment, there's plenty of opportunities, but when you're not, or you don't have access to the resources that you need to be able to get that information to inform your public comments or change the minds of your local elected officials on some local zoning decision or water management or other resource distribution decision, that you can stand up and say, oh, where are the data for that? Have you, there's so many examples. The executive order on gold standard science basically gives elected officials the authority to decide what studies will and won't be considered based on their political agendas, or if a study is not compatible with the decisions they want to make, the elected officials can remove it from consideration, not the quality of the decision of the data and the analyses that are done on those data. So our leaders at all levels need to be thoroughly understanding of and committed to what I call scientific integrity, and there was a big push in the previous administration to document, codify what that means and try and implement that across the federal government. And I think that has to be in all sectors and at all levels. I could go on, but I'll pause right there.
That's great. Thank you for that. Let's open it up for questions from you all or comments about data recovery and data in this space. There you go.
Hi, I may have missed it, so apologies if you've already solved the world's problems before I walked in, but I'm just wondering, is there a repository set up or any place where existing data sets could be aggregated? And the best example I know where I feel like this is happening is NOAA shut down all the weather tracking and has now moved that to Princeton. And it feels like, couldn't we get great universities, and we're sitting in one, to each take on sort of a different part of the data puzzle? I just wonder, with the quick firings, like which of your organizations is tracking data sets and where is willing to house them?
So a lot of the environmental law, environmental justice, public health data, DOT, Department of Transportation data, I'm trying to think of what EPA data, was scraped and is contained at the Harvard Dataverse. So you can go to the Harvard University Dataverse, and there are a couple of archives there. One is called HELD, Harvard Environmental Law Data. And what is your data archive?
It's all on Harvard Dataverse.
Okay.
All on Harvard Dataverse. Yeah.
So you'll find everything in the Dataverse.
What are you missing, like in terms of what would be your wish list for you to house?
We did not look at we did not do the NOAA data. We didn't do any of the atmospheric data.
So actually, we did.
You
There
guys
is-
did a bunch too.
There is yes, I think that all of the major, what I mean, like all of the major database that are used for scientific research have been scraped and downloaded and preserved. And they're mostly on Harvard Dataverse. Just yesterday was communicated that also through my lab and other effort, we also scraped and saved all of the remote sensing data, which all of the satellite information, which is massive from NOAA. And I have to say, I mean, and I'm sure other organization of Princeton, I mean, most of the university, and I have to thank Harvard actually, because Harvard is putting resources available in terms of data storage and computing to be able to save that, all of this information. So Harvard Dataverse, as far as I know, it has a huge repository. I think Anna correctly pointed out that there is the public, and we put some resources actually up there. The public environmental data partners are very active in all the scraping and preserving, but also kind of coordinating all of the different effort. And what is also interesting that I know that the public environmental data partners are in coordination with European and Canadian university, where we are also doing a backup of all of these federal data sets outside the United States. I know they're being backed up from some university in Paris, and there are conversations in Canada. I mean, you are correct in terms that it's completely possible that different subset are available in different places. But I would say among the one I mentioned, I don't know, Anna, if you wanted something to add, but there is pretty, I would say, one of the best coordinated effort that we are seeing. I don't know, Anna, if do you know of others?
No, that's correct. A lot of them are dispersed among multiple repositories.
So we've put up a QR code and links to each of the organizations that our panelists are associated with. The QR code contains links to a lot of other resources that you can consult, and that's up on the Salata website under the Strengthening Communities research cluster. Next question.
Hi, my name is Greg Beyer, and I'm working on AI issues. And I actually came to Harvard Square maybe 13 years ago to preserve Tibetan literature, where we scanned millions of pages. So we paid people to crowdsource the preservation of Tibetan literature through USAID. I'm obsessed with preserving stuff. And I'm incensed that like the data is getting deleted and we're just gonna look out the window and see the change and pretend nothing's happening. So the question is, if there's going like, could there become like a unified effort to start archiving all data everywhere and maybe house it on archive.org and build like a whole system? Because if it happens here, it could happen anywhere.
Melissa, do you know if there is a broader effort underway that's coordinated?
I love your passion, Greg. I don't know of like all data everywhere. I think ultimately, you know, everything is going to be a trade-off as to somebody has to make a decision about where do we put our resources, partly because it's time, but also we, you know, just can't do everything all the time. So the one place I'd send you is the Environmental Data Governance Initiative. They've been doing a lot. Project Impact, I think, is another one. But I think, to me, it's one thing to just be saving data. I think one of the things that we had made some progress on in the last 10 or 20 years is the development of interfaces that allow people to access the data. And to me, that's just as important. And I would love to see some resources being put toward preserving or actually improving the ability of real-world decision makers to access the data and use it sensibly.
May I respond?
Yeah.
Yeah. May I? So it just seems logical to me that like archive.org has an open upload and is a well-established SEO-wise on the internet, right? And it's not that hard to build AI robots just to go out and collect data. And then they have a flag out front of like planet Earth, right in front of the place. So Brewster and his whole team will obviously get behind it, and it just seems like this is just so obvious. And it just, I just feel like, and also it's not really that much money if you think like.
Okay, so what about the environmental impacts of data centers? You know, we haven't solved that problem yet. And if we're using AI without some deliberation about what are our priorities, what are the trade-offs, and making an informed decision about where we want to come down at this moment on that question, I think there's a broader set of, it's not just a technical problem, there's a broader set of values that need to be considered.
I would say save the data first, and we'll figure out the rest of it later.
Let me just add, I think that is a very, I think the question of should we preserve all data is unequivocally yes. The how is always the part that people get tripped up on. I've seen some of the smartest people I've ever met spend years at the White House struggling to get a single nationally consistent data source for water that ended up not even making it into the tool because we missed it by, I think it was 7 business days. And the how became like there's a bureaucratic rule and red tape, and we got stuck there, right? And so the data was ready, the tool was ready, it could have all happened, someone could have clicked a button, and we couldn't get past those hurdles. Like smart people couldn't figure out how to change the rules. So I think the bigger question is how do we get people to see the value in this collectively so that it's not just about scientists and researchers collecting data. It is the people in communities who see themselves actually in the data, that we're collecting the important data, that we're getting rid of data gaps. I think the how gets worked out, but I also think the how should be the federal government, right? Like we shouldn't give up on our federal government yet. I know it feels rough for some folks right now, but there were processes that were stymied even in the past 8 to 12 years to try to put better protections around scientific data and science and integrity, and they got beaten back by the same folks that don't want their industries regulated. And so at some point, if we've got children's books that handle morality better than our federal government policies, we've got to start thinking about holding people accountable and making this stuff happen in our federal government.
Other questions?
Thank you all so much. I am curious about thinking about the end of this current administration. How do we rebuild? What does that look like for all of you? You know, assuming there will be, pauses or, try an attempt to end data collection in addition to destroying the kind of expertise within agencies. Just curious how you're thinking about what moving forward will look like or could look like.
I'll say one quick comment, which is that this moment is a moment where people are taking the data and thinking, how do we build better tools? Because the tools that were up online were very much constrained by the existing rules on what you could put up. So this right now is a kind of nice, fertile time to think about usability of data and accessibility. And I think that there's going to be a lot of work done over the next couple of years just on those questions. How do we take what we already have, what we already know, and make it more accessible to people who are in the communities that are being affected?
So very quickly, maybe in a very optimistic viewpoint. So first of all, the interesting thing that is scientific evidence doesn't, especially in terms of very controversial issue, doesn't need always the most up-to-date data because, I've been doing analysis on the health impact of air pollution for 30 years, and whether I stop looking at the data 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, actually doesn't change much. Don't tell around too much. So I think that the good news is that even if we are going to let's hope it doesn't happen, right? But even if we're going to lose some, even there are going to be some small data gaps, even there, here and there. From the optimistic view of a statistician, I think we'll be able to overcome that. I'm pretty confident about that. The other thing is I always see a crisis as an opportunity. And I think that the crisis is leading to a massive effort from student, academia, nonprofit, and even actually the corporate sector. One thing that I haven't mentioned, but I can tell you Amazon, Google, and Microsoft and S3 are also building enormous data repository. And each of these major company, we can talk about the dark side, but the good side, they all have the AI for good. And so they are preserving all of this data. But the upside, the reason why the crisis is going to lead an opportunity is that we are going to have all of this data finally, actually, even if not perfect, downloaded and organized. And that's where the high can come. So, I work at the interface between the environmental impact of AI, and that's a problem. But now we're going to be able pretty soon to train, and actually it's happening already, to train artificial intelligence model on all of the government databases and be able to actually address, and they are phenomenal actually in terms of filling data gaps as well. So I think, clearly we got a moment of crisis. So we are, I will call it another disaster, but I'm also feeling very optimistic in terms of that rigorous science doesn't need always the best possible data at the last minute. It needs, massive amount of data, and then we're leading with a concerted effort that will allow to train AI much better. And AI is not going to solve all the problem, but they're going to definitely be very valuable to fill data gaps.
We have time for one more question. And it could come from one of you. Dylan?
Sure, I kind of.
You're being cold called.
Sure, no, that's fine. I'm actually Thank you. So one of the things that I'm curious about is, with all of this work, and you said a crisis is an opportunity. I'm curious how you see moving forward, maybe as the crisis either worsens or hopefully eventually levels out, some of these infrastructures that have already been built, like PEDP, and these other infrastructures. Do you think that there's room for more collaboration, more of integrated infrastructure for this data? I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that, or is it something that after time will just sort of dissipate and we'll return to the status quo before this crisis?
Anna.
Something that Sarah's question, I work with Sarah, by the way, so full disclosure. I keep thinking about the people like you and Anna and others, especially the people inside the agency who are responsible for all these data and collecting them and using them and making them accessible. And so, one, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of permeability, especially if the federal government is hiring again at some point for data folks. And I want to make sure those people are taken care of, because the thing that actually makes the data usable is someone who knows what they're doing and how to actually collect it and make it available and understands these government systems. And we lost a lot of that institutional knowledge. And so it's a little left field, but I think one thing that's really important is thinking about civil service reform and making sure that civil servants are protected and that you can build a career at the federal government and be safe to do your job irregardless of your political ideology. So it's not immediately obvious that we should be thinking about that, but I think as we're having nonprofits hire these folks from the federal government into their organizations, we should be thinking about what makes that job worthwhile, and how do we think about legislative reform that will build those protections into staff protections that are much more durable than what we have right now.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for all of the work each of you is doing in this space. And I just want to thank all of you for coming. And finally, thank you to Salata and the Salata Institute for hosting this.